Hello everyone, welcome to the stress management portion of this presentation. Now when it comes to stress overall, there are a lot of tools and techniques that we can use, especially mind-body tools and techniques to help us manage our stress and to help us become more self-aware. But whenever it comes to overcoming this constant battle that we have with stress throughout our lives, I think it really comes down to how we approach life and unwiring these processes that we've formed whenever it comes to how we address stressors in our life and our triggers, and rewiring a healthy view of our overall view of what life is and our approach to life. Are we approaching it from this fight or flight state where we're nervous and anxious and worried, or are we approaching everything in life as if it's a gift, whether it's good news or whether it's a trial or an obstacle or a barrier? How we approach these things is that's really what overcoming stress and developing this attitude of resiliency rather than finding ways to totally get rid of our triggers. I don't think there's any way we could possibly get rid of every single thing that triggers us and that causes us chronic stress on the daily unless we were to ship ourselves off to some deserted island. And yes, there are tools and techniques that we can use to help manage stress on the daily, but if we don't start unwiring our thinking processes and start becoming more self-aware so that we can realize where our triggers are coming from and the background of those triggers, how did they get here in the first place? Whether it was how we were raised, things that we went through in our past, if we don't go through this healing process, it's really hard to unwire those habitual thought patterns that we've formed, and then finding healthy ways to overcome them and to uproot this thinking process so that we can start rewiring this healthy, life-giving process. And it's really interesting because the way that we are wired, we're so genetically, intricately wired in such a way that our bodies love gratitude. Our bodies love and operate only out of this parasympathetic, calm, and peaceful state. Our biochemical processes cannot function if we're in this stressed out state all the time. It's called sympathetic versus parasympathetic. The sympathetic state means that we're in constant fight or flight, meaning we are very easily triggered. If you get that call from your boss and it constantly sends you into this tense fight or flight state, that's what the sympathetic response is. The parasympathetic response is the rest and digest phase, where our body starts functioning properly, our biochemical processes are going throughout our bodies in a healthy way so that we're not creating clogs in these biochemical processes. Our digestive system, our metabolic processes, all of them stop if we're in this sympathetic state. So in order to start unwiring these thinking patterns, I'm going to give you some tools and techniques that you can start using to help become more aware and to help get yourself into this parasympathetic state. So something that I started doing, instead of creating a million to-do lists for myself, because those tend to be super stressful, especially if you're like me and you've kind of had this thinking pattern ingrained in you that you should feel guilty if you don't complete all of the tasks that you've set for yourself or that others have demanded of you. So instead of doing a whole lot of to-do lists throughout your day, maybe start setting goals for yourself, especially if you find whenever you're trying to fall asleep at night, if you have all these to-do list things going on in your mind that are keeping you from being able to find rest, then maybe create the to-do list before you wake up the next morning. And instead of trying to think about, am I going to forget to do this in the morning, all of these tasks I have to do, sometimes just journaling them or writing them down, even if you don't necessarily use that to-do list, just getting them out there can really help unclog some of this thinking that goes on at night, especially when we're trying to wind down before bed. That always seems to be the time that all these anxiety thoughts start creeping in. Something else that really started helping me, especially with my journey toward recovery and mindfulness and a little bit of my background, I suffered from an extreme eating disorder when I was in high school. And the one thing that really started making me more aware of thinking patterns that were going on, and especially destructive, toxic thoughts that started developing this disorder, that they weren't the main cause, but they were a severe contributor. So I started journaling, and I was able to analyze and start recognizing certain thought patterns. And whenever you start recognizing these thought patterns, then sometimes that causes you to go a little bit deeper. which is why I also love this other technique that I started using, which is called mind mapping. So if you find that you're in this constant state of anxiety or things are just really bothering you, then sometimes if you start journaling and you start kind of creating literally a little bubble map of this is the feeling that I'm feeling, and then it branches off into different aspects of your life, whether it's another thought, something else going on, a circumstance, until eventually you can start seeing patterns and get to the root issue for why you're stuck in this toxic thinking pattern. Another powerful tool is guided imagery and meditation. So guided imagery can be a form of meditation. It's pretty much creating this strong visualization where you imagine yourself in a place that you love, or this peaceful, almost getaway place like a beach or a vacation spot. And especially if you're trying to fall asleep and you're having a difficult time getting your mind off of all these different tasks you need to complete, sometimes getting away to this getaway place in your mind where you're at a peaceful spot and you're engaging all of your senses, you're thinking about the waves and the sand underneath your toes and how the wind feels in your hair, that can really get your mind off of this chaos conundrum that sometimes goes on and really get you into this parasympathetic state where you can actually start being able to fall asleep earlier. Another technique is deep breathing. Now this is so underrated because our cells thrive off of oxygen as a life source. If we are not breathing, if we're not engaging our diaphragm and breathing through our stomachs rather than shallow through our chest, then we're not going to be giving our cells the oxygen that they need to carry out all of their functions. If you think about it, whenever you do yoga poses, there's no way you can hold those poses without doing proper deep breathing techniques. And if you'll notice throughout your day, I urge you to take inventory. Just sort of check in with yourself and see, am I breathing shallow right now? Especially whenever we go through a really acute, stressful situation, we tend to either hold our breath or we start gasping for breath or breathing really shallow. So instead of doing that, that actually will help heighten your cortisol, which is that stress hormone. So what you can do before you respond in a stressful situation or before you start going into this worried panic state, just take a pause, whether you have to even take a bathroom break or whatever. Just get away and take a few deep breaths, and that'll actually get you out of this stressed out sympathetic state and into the parasympathetic state. This way your body is actually working for you and not against you, because then all of your biochemical processes can take place as they should, and it's not going to impede on your ability to make proper decisions. So other things you can do to help get yourself into a peaceful, calm, relaxing state, especially before bed, is drinking teas such as passion flower or lemon balm. They're very calming and very soothing. Just make sure if you drink them before bed that you give yourself at least a couple hours beforehand so you don't wake yourself up having to use the restrooms. Now, sunlight. Sunlight is vital whenever it comes to our circadian rhythm. So, like I mentioned in the sleep section, you want to limit your time around blue light because it mimics the sunlight rays. And those rays of the sunlight kind of signal to our body that it's time to get up, it's time to get moving. And it actually, this vitamin D is able to convert to tryptophan, which then converts to serotonin and melatonin at night. So if you're having sleeping issues, you might want to check your vitamin D levels, or just make sure that you're getting at least 20 minutes of sunlight first thing in the morning. This will also have a drastic impact on your mood. Seasonal depression definitely is a thing, because if you're not getting enough sunlight in the day, that's definitely going to impact your hormones and neurotransmitters that will make you feel happier and not so depressed or moody. So don't feel crazy if you start experiencing seasonal depression. There's even some things you can get like sunlight lamps, which also help you get vitamin D and mimics the sunlight. So our bodies really, really love routine. And if our circadian rhythm, like I mentioned in the sleep portion, is out of whack, this is also going to have a great impact on our stress levels as well. And I love this chart here because it shows that our body is actually doing different things at different hours of the day. So sometimes I know it's a thing in certain Chinese or Asian medicine, they'll be able to see what organ system might not be functioning optimally if you're waking up at certain hours throughout the night, such as if you're, let's see, I believe liver function is involved in the hours of 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. So that's just an interesting thing to look at. But it shows how even our organ systems love routine, and different things are going on in our bodies at different hours. That's why it's so important to honor our body's circadian rhythm. And since they love routine, if you start doing the same things every day and waking up at about the same time, even on the weekends, and going to bed at the same time, I know that's harder on the weekends, but it kind of sets your circadian rhythm up for success, where it creates this routine for your body where it knows, okay, at 6 a.m., I need to wake up. So sometimes people get to the point where they don't really need to rely on an alarm, but they'll just set it as a backup. And that really is ideal. So our bodies love routine, and melatonin secretion actually starts at 9 p.m. I thought it was 7 p.m. But if our melatonin secretion is beginning then, we don't want to be eating lots of food late at night. That's going to impede that melatonin's ability to really go into use and to help create this winding down pattern if we're having to invest energy in digestion. Something you can also do is to create a pattern where, especially smelling certain essential oils at night, can really help you with stress at night, like lavender, sage, and bergamot. They're very, very calming and very soothing. Not only that, but it also creates this pattern. It creates a pattern in our brain that pretty much signals, okay, if I smell this scent, then this means that I need to start winding down at night. It's just the way our brains are wired. So when it comes to stress, I love this quote: allow your mind and body to be ahead of your environment. So that goes along with what I mentioned before, where instead of trying to address our triggers head on, it's kind of more than that. There's a deeper issue here. And it really comes down to what our approach to life is. Are we approaching each day like it's a gift? Are we going into each day excited for what's to come? Or are we going into each day worried or stressed out or anxious about what's coming our way? And a lot of this goes into unwiring and rewiring our brains and our thinking patterns by first becoming aware of certain thought patterns, which can be done through journaling or some of the techniques that I mentioned before, and then getting to the root of why our triggers are the way they are. Why do things like traffic, why does that annoy you so much? Or why do you have this certain conflict with a certain relationship? What is it about this person that's triggering you, and why? So overcoming stress overall, it's really a lifelong process, but we do develop this resiliency the more that we become more and more self-aware and start healing these deep-rooted issues. That's whenever we develop this attitude of resiliency and this appreciation for life, because life really is a gift. So this is a resource that I really love. So Dr. Caroline Leaf, she studies neuroscience, and she gives a lot of techniques. I believe she wrote a book about a 21-day, pretty much brain reset. And she talks a lot about how our mind and our brain are two separate things, but our mind has the power to actually control the neuroplasticity and even the neurologic function by building certain proteins and web-like structures in our brain that are literally like the physical manifestation of a thought. So it's very, very powerful, because if you think about it, the thoughts that we're thinking today are actually the proteins that we're building later on. We are literally paving the way for our own physiological health through our thoughts. That's super empowering. So this is a little technique that she talks about in one of her blogs, where if you find yourself in an acute stressful situation, she uses a combination of breathing techniques as well as guided or a sort of visualization imagery technique in order to calm herself down so that she can respond to this stressful event in a more healthy manner. So of course she talks a lot about breathing, deep breathing with your belly instead of through your chest, shallow. And this is going to get you out of the sympathetic stressful state into the parasympathetic state, where your cortisol is going to decrease so you can actually think clearly. So she talks about this imagery technique where you imagine this problem is in a small shrunken box and that you're bigger than the box and actually brainstorming solutions on this box. Now, visualization doesn't work for everyone. I love guided imagery personally, especially whenever I'm trying to fall asleep. But sometimes visualizing something or imagining something that's sort of puts the problem into perspective and removes yourself from the situation at hand so that you can actually brainstorm and think of solutions in a clear way while in a calm state. It's very powerful. And of course, she talks a lot about learning from our struggles. So if we change our mindset toward life and toward life's struggles and obstacles, then we see them as gifts in the sense that they're teaching something. They're making us grow. They're producing endurance. So as long as we're going through this unwiring and rewiring process of our thoughts in our brain, then we're really doing ourselves good when it comes to developing this attitude of resiliency. So I talked a little bit about epigenetics before, but I love talking about epigenetics because it is so empowering. Epigenetics, I believe the Greek terminology for it actually means above the gene, which is very interesting because genetics in itself is the science of the genes that are there. So all of us are born with this genetic code, and we cannot change the genetic code that we are born with that codes for things like our eye color or our hair color. However, epigenetics is a study of the expression of certain genes that they used to think were junk DNA. And this supposed junk DNA is actually it plays a huge role in almost all chronic illnesses, even those involving cancer. So epigenetics means that the environmental things we're exposed to have the ability to turn on genes that promote life or turn off genes that promote the growth of cancer cells, the growth of toxicity in our body, really. So factors that actually affect the expression of our genes are things like exercise, eating healthy, of course, especially greens. Stress in itself, and even things like meditation, prayer, all of these things have the ability to turn on and turn off certain genes. It's very empowering. So I know a lot of us walk around thinking that we really are the product of our parents, and that whatever diseases, whatever things were passed on are what we will suffer with. I've even heard people say before, well, I'm angry and I have anger problems because it just runs in the family. My dad was angry, my grandpa was angry, therefore I can walk around being angry. And that's not exactly true. See, epigenetics gives us the ability to change our destiny. It really is this empowering thing that allows us to take our health, our mental health, and our physical health into our own hands. So now all this research is showing, even whenever it comes to our stress response, we have the ability to turn on and turn off genes that are significant in stress response. And there was an interesting study that was done in mice where they exposed them to a certain essential oil or lavender smell. And whenever they exposed them to this scent, then they also shocked them simultaneously. While that sounds a little cruel, it showed that once they were being exposed to this lavender scent again, they experienced heightened levels of stress and anxiety and this certain corticosteroid involved in stress response in humans as well. And even whenever they weren't being shocked and they were smelling the scent, they had heightened stress response. Now, this same response to just this scent alone was passed down to their family 7 generations. So this shows that, yes, propensities definitely can be passed down. Now, I look at propensities in the form of disease states as well, but the propensities are behavioral. Like this study they did with mice, it's strictly behavioral, right? This caused epigenetic changes that allowed them to have this increased stress response whenever they were exposed to this certain trigger, which was the lavender scent. Now, the same thing happens in us. If you think about it, say, if you take the disease diabetes, for example, they're showing that it has more to do with environmental factors like diet and lifestyle changes than it does the genetic code that is being passed down. So those behaviors, the way that these people are managing stress, their triggers, a lot of these propensities have been passed down, which causes a certain pattern to be formed, which has caused certain chronic illnesses like diabetes. In that case, maybe it's using food as some sort of comfort, which could contribute to health concerns. So whenever we look at stress and our stress response, it has more to do with what behavior is ingrained in us. So we have this propensity, but then how do we start unwiring this propensity? Well, the first step, of course, is awareness. So you might notice that you have a certain trigger. Maybe it's certain images. Maybe it's loud noises. Maybe it's lights. This propensity could have been passed down through traumas that you're not even aware of, traumas in your past family, traumas in your ancestors that you didn't even know. However, this epigenetic pattern, this either silence or expression or lack of expression of this specific gene has taken place in your body now. But the good news is you can totally unwire that. You can totally switch on or switch off that gene that's not functioning as it should, and that's causing you to be so stressed. So how do you do that? Well, first you need to focus on lifestyle factors, of course, like eating right, including things like greens in your diet, exercising, but also whenever it comes to stress, being able to recognize what that trigger is, but then go back and see, why am I specifically in my life? Why am I so triggered by this one thing? Even patterns of behavioral and relational issues that we are suffering with. If you look back in your family tree, you might find that family members might have suffered from the similar things, like a pattern of codependency or alcoholism or drug abuse. These things can definitely, these propensities can be passed down, but it's so empowering that this can end with us. We can take it into our own hands and say, no, this is not going to be my destiny. I'm going to dig deeper within myself, which sometimes is a painful process of unwiring these thinking patterns and digging deeper into why am I wired this way, and how can I heal from this? How can I get advice and counsel from others? How can I talk about this? How can I get this out in a healthy way? So I do hope that you see how empowering epigenetics is whenever it comes to unwiring our traumas. Because really, we're all handed, I call it this deck of cards that we're all handed at birth, which is pretty much stands for our propensities. But knowing that we have the ability to change them, and the most amazing part is that whenever we start changing them, then that epigenetic pattern has ended with us, meaning we don't get to pass it down. Even if you've already had children, your epigenetic expression affects all of the people around you. Just think about it. Whenever a stressed out person walks in the room, how does that make you feel? Pretty stressed out. Epigenetics is kind of similar in that way. We can affect and create this ripple effect with those around us. So another important thing whenever it comes to stress is that, well, this picture that you're looking at here is a chromosome. And these little green caps that are on the ends of these chromosomes, I pretty much compare them to an inlet on the end of a shoelace, like that little plastic cap. And that prevents your shoelaces from unraveling. And these telomeres have the same function. And these telomeres become shortened due to DNA damage, whether it's from oxidative stress, from a poor diet, from emotional stress. All of these things and UV damage can break down these telomeres, which actually is what leads to aging. So sometimes there's actually a genetic test you can get done that some people will see what their internal age clock is, which pretty much shows sort of the activity of an enzyme that protects the telomeres so that it keeps them longer. So that enzyme is called telomerase, and that's what protects these ends that are pretty much contributing to your internal age. So they did this really, really interesting study where they had people practice something called transcendental meditation. It's a really in-depth form of meditation, and they practice this 20 minutes twice a day. And if you look at this graph, they showed significant increase in this enzyme that's actually protecting their telomeres, meaning just doing meditation, even if it's 5 minutes, it has significant ability to increase your lifespan. And telomeres, the fact that they're being shortened by stress is a major contributor, shows that meditation also is able to decrease your stress levels, help with your resiliency, thus increasing your lifespan by protecting your telomeres. So don't stress out if you want to live longer. Learn ways to manage your stress. And this is a very, very interesting study that they did as well, which is also how epigenetics is applied. So in this study that they did through Dean Ornish, they took these group of individuals, 30 men who had prostate cancer, and they used this intensive lifestyle change where they implemented dietary changes, they had them exercise, they took certain supplements, and they took part in stress management. And after doing this study, they were able to downregulate a gene that contributes to the growth of prostate cancer, and they were able to build up proteins that actually protect your cells against prostate cancer. That is super empowering, knowing that we have the ability to turn on and off genes that are involved in cancer. Incredible. So here's another interesting study they did where yoga is a it's very medicinal. All of the postures and breathing and techniques that they used are made in such a way that you have to engage in this deep soft belly breathing. And there's no way that you can really stay in this stressed out sympathetic state while going through a yoga class. So I urge you to check it out. It's very powerful, and it also gets you a whole lot more in tune with your body. Even whenever I started implementing yoga in my health journey, I was able to get more in touch with my hunger cues and being able to distinguish, am I actually hungry right now, or am I just craving something, and getting more in touch with my body. So after doing this 10-day yoga lifestyle intervention, where they learned postures, breathing, they had group sessions because there is power in healing in community. They were given individual advice and had stress management discussions. Their inflammatory markers, such as C-reactive protein, drastically decreased, and their endorphins, which are like those happy feel-good hormones, drastically increased. So another major player whenever it comes to stress management and our sleep is vitamin D. And the reason for that is it converts tryptophan to serotonin, which is also that really feel-good, happy hormone that makes you want to dance and hug the world. It also leads to decreased anxiety, and it plays a major role in keeping our telomeres protected as well, so it promotes longevity. So do get your vitamin D levels tested. It's also involved in insulin resistance. So check your vitamin D levels, make sure you're getting some sunlight as well. So whenever it comes to a social life, we know now, I know we're in a society nowadays where we're very isolated. We're super connected through social media, but not so connected when it comes to one-on-one or actual face-to-face communication. And it's so detrimental to our health. Like I talked about epigenetics before, there are certain hormonal changes that take place even whenever you give someone a hug or have a conversation with them. If it's a positive, uplifting conversation that leaves you feeling good afterwards, it actually affects you on a deep physiological level. So it's very important that we are spending time with loved ones and with people who we have a true, deep, and meaningful connection with, and not just a superficial social media connection. And I love this quote down here that says, the point of self-help and personal development is to show up for the world. So we're also in an age where there's so much self-help resources out there. There's so many books, there's tools, there's techniques, there's this self-love movement. But if we're doing that just for selfish and personal gain, but then we're staying in this closed-off shell of a person and we're not spreading the gifts and the love that we ourselves have received, we're really robbing the world of what we have to offer. And here's an interesting quote that they actually did a study showing that social isolation is as harmful to your body as being an alcoholic and twice as harmful as being obese. So that just shows how great social isolation plays in our physiological well-being. So here are some action points that I would love for you to try out this week. Try meditating. Now, I know a lot of the time people get confused by what meditation is. Even going for a walk in the park or simply having a quiet time in the morning. Start with a couple minutes. Work your way up to 5 minutes. You can even download certain apps that will actually walk you through guided imagery, and they'll walk you through certain types of meditation. It's not specific toward any type of religion. You can, even if you download certain apps, some of them are geared to certain religions. So if you're interested, just do a little research and find what works for you. Even exercise can be a form of meditation, quiet time, taking a few minutes to do some soft, deep breathing. I urge you to try it. You will have drastic changes in your everyday schedule, even if you just start your day with it. So eat foods high in magnesium, vitamin C, and iron. All of these help with managing your stress and helping with sleep. Get sunlight, especially early, first thing in the morning. So this is going to help with your vitamin D levels, and this is going to help your overall circadian rhythm. Stick to a routine because our brains and our bodies love routine, and create a relaxing sleep environment. And make sure you find some way to manage your stress. Remember that stress isn't just removing ourselves from the things that trigger and bother us. It's finding a way to develop this attitude of resiliency and this attitude that shows that we recognize life as a gift, and it doesn't have to be this worrisome, stressful, mundane thing that we're going through. We're all on this journey, and we're all on a spectrum. And although there's no end goal, there's really no end whenever it comes to a health journey. But all the steps that it takes to get to where we want to be and where we see ourselves, if we can visualize that, and if we can continue on making these healthy changes for ourselves, then we really are showing up for the world and becoming the best version of ourselves that we can be for those that we love and those that we want to pour into. I firmly believe that you cannot pour from an empty cup. So if you are at a place right now where you feel really stressed, really burnt out, do the things that you need to do to fill yourself back up, whether it's counseling or being involved in a community, talking to someone, trying to journal, trying to meditate. All of these tools and techniques will create a more resilient person where you'll be able to start addressing why you have triggers, why you are stressed, and then start showing up for the world with the best version that you can be. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this.